Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started in just a minute. We just want to give folks a chance to join.
I mean, I'd rather 30 minutes anyway, but I'm just saying,
Hi, everyone. We're going to get started in just another minute. Thanks so much. In solar, battery storage, and how they'll be increasingly important as we look to the future. As always, I remind you to spread the ABNY message and follow us on social at A Better NY on all channels. Before we kick off, we're lucky to have introductory remarks from ABNY board member and ABNY Foundation board member, Frances Resheske, Senior Vice President at Con Edison. So without further ado, I'll share the screen and show the video.
Hi, I'm Frances Resheske, Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs at Con Edison and a proud board member of our clean energy businesses. I want to thank the Association for a Better New York for the opportunity to introduce today's session. We all have a vested interest in what's ahead for our great city, both in terms of how we navigate the challenges of economic development and climate change. At Con Edison, we are tremendously focused on a clean and sustainable future. Many people don't know that Con Edison is the second largest solar producer in North America and the 7th in the world. And here in New York, we're committed to providing our customers with 100% clean electricity by the year 2040. That commitment includes all-in support for electric vehicles, tripling our energy efficiency programs by 2030, providing alternate energy for heating, and also renewables in New York State. New York is an important part of the national conversation. So happy Earth Day, and let's get on with the program. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Please put all of your questions for the panelists in the Q&A function. We will address them at the end. And without further ado, I'm going to pass the screen to our amazing moderator, Julie Tighe from NYLCV, New York League of Conservation Voters. And Julie, take it away. Thank you all so much for being here.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'm so happy to be here with great partners at ABNY and to be introduced by Frances. I think we all know Frances. She's like a one named person here in the energy world for sure. You know, this is really amazing to be here on Earth Day, and we're very excited. We're actually hosting a forum this evening so that people can learn more about where the mayor's candidates stand on the environment. And I think it's really great that you're all here today to hear from our great panelists. So I'd like everybody first to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about your areas of focus. So Melanie, I'm going to start with you.
Thanks, Julie. Certainly excited to be a part of this fantastic panel today. Melanie Littlejohn. I lead National Grid's efforts around community and customer engagement. And really today is at the heart of what I think is probably one of the most critical conversations that we are all having and staying focused on. And that is really around what does our clean energy future look like, and how do we all get there together? So certainly our pleasure to be a part of today's panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Melanie. And I think that leads nicely into Adrienne, who's going to help us get to that clean energy future.
I'm going to try, Julie, going to try. Thank you very much, Julie, for having me and for moderating today. And a big shout out to ABNY for hosting this youth panel. Really excited to be here and to have an opportunity to connect. So I'm Adrienne Downey. I'm the principal engineer for offshore wind at NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. NYSERDA's, we're busy in a number of fronts. You know, clean buildings, clean heating and cooling solutions, clean transportation solutions. But where I work in offshore wind, we're really tackled on a major prize as well, which is really decarbonization of our electricity grid. You know, our goal is 100% zero emissions grid by 2040 for the state of New York. That is no mean feat, and that is an incredibly short time frame. And a big portion of how we get there and how we plan to get there as a state is through a really exciting new resource, at least new to the US and new to New York, is offshore wind. And so I help to lead the program goal of 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035. And clearly, you know, tremendously important intersections in order to get us there with communities. I'm really glad to have this discussion about coastal resiliency and recovery. And I think that really shines a light on many of the attributes and aspects that we hope or that we aspire to build into this program. And particularly the focus on economic development as we grow the program. You know, it's really a minimum of 9 gigawatts by 2035. You know, that's 30% of our potential load at that point in time, but it's also 10,000 jobs and billions of dollars of infrastructure investments that we anticipate bringing to bear in service of that goal. And so, you know, really, again, excited to have this powerhouse panel of women on Earth Day, I might add, and looking forward to a great conversation. Thanks, Julie.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, we discussed this being the girl power panel. Well, we've already done a bunch of damage, and so we need to make sure that we are resilient. And so, Jainey Bavishi, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thanks, Julie, and thanks, ABNY, for hosting this panel. Really honored to be on this panel on Earth Day with amazing women climate and energy leaders. I am Jainey Bavishi. I'm the director of the New York City Mayor's Office of Climate Resiliency, just renamed as the Mayor's Office of Climate Resiliency. We are responsible for preparing New York City for the multiple impacts of climate change that we face, including coastal storms, sea level rise, intense precipitation, and extreme heat. And we're doing that with equity at the center. I have the privilege of working with a really talented team of climate leaders. It's a very interdisciplinary space, but I also have the privilege of working with almost every city agency to advance our $20 billion portfolio and multi-layered strategy to prepare the city for climate impacts.
Great, thank you so much. And I know you do a lot of work with our next panelist. So Cortney.
Hi. Thanks. I'm so pleased to be on this panel, and this is a really important Earth Day with President Biden's announcement today about the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions commitment from the United States. So this is a very special day, and there's so much going on in the country as well at the same time. So I believe we're going to look back in 5 years and think of this as a very historic time for so many reasons. So anyway, so I am the president of the Waterfront Alliance. The Waterfront Alliance is an advocacy organization for in New York and New Jersey for all of the coastline. There are 520 miles of linear coastline in just the 5 boroughs. So that's from here to Virginia, practically. So we are a coastal city. We have so much going on. And the Waterfront Alliance works for everything from education, advocacy, to making sure that the industrial and maritime aspects of our port are preserved and functioning for the supply chain and for our economy. Climate change impacts are here to stay. Unfortunately, if we were to stop all greenhouse gas emissions today, we still would be living with the impacts of climate change impacts from sea level rise, intense storms, and other impacts such as high heat days. So there's a lot of work to be done, and we're committed to it. And we also lead the Rise to Resilience Coalition, which I can talk a little bit about in terms of overall strategy.
Great, thank you so much. And the New York League of Conservation Voters is an advocacy group that is a little bit unique from many others, in that we also endorse candidates. We help elect candidates based on the environment, and we educate, engage, and empower New York voters to be championing environmental issues when they go to the ballot box, which I hope you will all do this coming June. So Cortney, to start things off, the Waterfront Alliance released the Waterfront and Resilience mayoral platform earlier this spring. What impact will the June 22nd primaries have in the direction of New York City moving to become a more resilient and sustainable city?
Well, the next mayor of New York City is going to be the climate change mayor, as will every single mayor from this time moving forward. There is nothing more transformational in terms of the city and what we're going to face than climate change. It's uncharted territory as well. Humans have not experienced this, and in terms of our infrastructure and the way that we've built our cities are not built to respond to this kind of change. So the next mayor really needs to embrace climate change as one of the major priorities of the administration. I think that there are several things that the next mayor needs to do. I would start, number one, with funding. Funding for all of the resiliency projects that we're going to need in the city, including the city infrastructure, continuing funding for the Mayor's Office of Resiliency and all the departments within the city that are so critical for that. And the other part of it too is that the next mayor really needs to have a strong presence for New York City and Washington, D.C. We need a really great team that's understanding all of the opportunities that the city has to gain through the advocacy and work on Capitol Hill, the opportunities that are coming from the Biden administration, taking advantage of those and making sure that they're used for projects and initiatives in New York City that are critically important. And the next part of it too is that climate resilience investments are really opportunities for economic growth. And so I think the next mayor marrying economic growth with investments and change and also providing opportunities and making sure that we're growing the workforce and a green workforce that is hired here in our region and in our city is a critical part of the path forward as well for the next mayor. So it's super important.
I 100% agree. I think the fact that the president has proposed the American Jobs Plan, where it really links infrastructure, climate, and jobs all together, is really a demonstration that we're starting to see our politicians sort of shifting how they think about these things. And Adrienne, you mentioned jobs as part of your introductory as well. And knowing that last month, the President Biden, announced a new climate agenda, including really amazing announcements related to offshore wind with a new priority and new wind energy areas in New York, which we advocated for, and in the New York Bight. What do you see the implications of the federal agenda on economic development in the region?
I mean, they're huge. We've been working steadily as a state on climate topics, for the past many, many years. I mean, offshore wind, we've been working on steadily at NYSERDA since, 2016 or even earlier, frankly, in the evolution of our New York State master plan. And under Governor Cuomo's leadership, and we've been continuing the steady drumbeat of this work, knowing that time is ticking. The urgency of climate change is now and waits for no one, and we need to be advancing this, our work on solutions as we work on mitigation and adaptation measures. We still need to focus on this whole package of solutions. But offshore wind is a great example of where the states are I wouldn't say limited in our ability, because certainly we have a significant purview with regards to our energy policy and our abilities, but they can only be amplified and buttressed. And offshore wind straddles both, federal jurisdiction as well as state jurisdictions. We've been working on every piece of the puzzle that we can, collaborating with stakeholders regionally to engage in dialogue about the responsible and cost-effective development of these resources to bring them to bear. But the opportunity to work in partnership with the federal government, really just has the opportunity to accelerate that tremendously. There's a regulatory and permitting backlog with BOEM on existing projects that are in the hopper and ready to go. States up and down the coastline have been advancing targets, and of course New York leading the way with our 9 gigawatt target. But up and down the states, from Maine through the Carolinas, there's almost 30 gigawatts of targets that are being brought to fruition by the states, and that are again amplified now by a national target to realizing them. And so that's what's really exciting, is that you have this really historic alignment between the intentionality and the hard work that the states have been pulling together, the groundwork that we've prepared, and now with federal collaboration, we're poised to take off in a really powerful way. So the March 29th suite of announcements, the Jumpstart package, if you will, really put a central focus on the ability to bring these resources to fruition. And what that means is that it starts to build an enormous amount of confidence in the market. And this is what's going to be so powerful, I think, with all of the alignments between the local level, municipal level, state level, and now federal level, is to be able to say, with enormous confidence to the clean energy industry that wants to grow and wants to bring, opportunities for manufacturing, for port investments, for, operations and maintenance, for jobs across the board. And we're talking thousands of jobs. If those signals of transparency, of clarity, of reliability, with governments working as a willing and able and committed partner in this exercise, those jobs are going to come. And that is what is going to be, just so exciting in the next couple of years, is to start seeing those jobs come to fruition. New York anticipates that 9 gigawatts will bring 10,000 jobs by 2035. I think I mentioned that in the opening remarks. The Biden administration is anticipating that the new lease areas that it's pursuing in the New York Bight, with our good friend Amanda Lefton at the helm of BOEM now, pushing for those new lease areas and additional leasing actions to follow alongside our other national coastlines, has the opportunity to deliver 77,000 jobs by 2030 in the development of this target. And that sets a pathway for a next target of 110 gigawatts of offshore wind potentially by 2050. So I really cannot understate, just how historic these moments are, how powerful the alignment between multiple levels of government are, recognizing, our powers, our approaches, our connections at each of these levels. And that alignment is just a tremendous recipe for success. So I couldn't be, more pleased to see the action and the leadership that is ramping up, and to know, as we do, that is, the foundation, the groundwork has been well laid by the states and by working with local communities, to make sure that we're ready for these opportunities now that they're ready to kick off.
It is really exciting to have a federal government where previously I think we were concerned that they were going to deny projects, for example, for offshore wind, not necessarily based on any scientific reasoning. So it is nice to have this sort of whole government approach and commitment to offshore wind and the jobs and the supply chain that can go with it. So Jainey, how does the city work with local communities for projects such as the Hunts Point Resiliency and the East Side Coastal Resiliency Project, which we've heard a lot about in the news?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. Those two projects in particular, Hunts Point Resiliency and Eastside Coastal Resiliency, are quite unique because they came through a process that the federal government launched after Sandy called Rebuild by Design. Now, Rebuild by Design essentially kicked off a community visioning process that brought together designers and communities to think through what a vision of resilient coastline for both of those communities could look like before any money was awarded and technical analysis was done. So there was a visioning process that essentially preceded the actual grant for the project. And then after money was awarded for implementation of the project, we had to then go back and do technical analysis, and community engagement has been at the center of that as well, with city agencies engaging communities in every step of the planning process to really both educate communities, use those engagement opportunities for risk awareness to really understand how climate risk will play out in those communities, but then also design what these projects could actually look like with the grant money that was provided. I think we've learned a lot. The coastal protection is really a new class of infrastructure for New York City. And this is the first time after Sandy that we've really designed and planned and now constructed these massive coastal protection projects. So we've learned a lot through the process and are taking those lessons and really incorporating them into the next round of projects. One specific lesson is that it's really important to have an independent panel of technical advisors that are not just based with the city, but rather independent, a third party that can be a liaison between the city and community, especially when it comes to questions around engineering and construction. So that's something that we're implementing in projects going forward. so we were really excited to announce that construction is underway on the Eastside Coastal Resiliency Project just last week. But I want to also pick up, because the federal government was such an important catalyst for those projects, I want to pick up on some of the comments that Adrienne made on the clean energy and renewable energy side of things, because I think that we also have a new opportunity with the Biden administration in terms of advancing future resiliency projects in the city. One of the challenges that we have with the way federal funds flow for resiliency projects is that they often come after disaster. And that's an inherently reactive approach to action that we should be able to take proactively to these impacts that we know are here and are going to continue to worsen in the city. We're excited about the American Jobs Plan, Biden's infrastructure plan, because there's a lot of opportunity for resilient infrastructure funding to come through. There's also a big allocation right now in the plan for housing, which we think could also, help to advance our resiliency work in the city. So lots of opportunity there. We're really excited also about their language and their narrative around a whole of government approach. I just want to highlight one recent accomplishment in New York City. Just last month, the City Council passed a mandate to incorporate and account for our climate projections in the design and construction of all city capital projects. This is huge. Lots of credit to the Rise to Resilience Coalition and Cortney's leadership for helping us get this done. We're going to start with a pilot program over the next 5 years to really apply our climate resiliency design guidelines, which provide this guidance to a diversity of capital projects, both in terms of asset type, but also budget, so we can really understand how those guidelines work in implementation, or refine the guidelines based on those learnings, and then move into a full mandate. But this is really an important step because it shifts the paradigm from thinking about climate resiliency projects in a silo, just like the flood protection projects that we often see in the news, but really starting to incorporate a climate resiliency lens across all city investments. And we're hoping that we can continue to move the ball on actions like this that really embed the incorporation of climate impacts across all city decisions and actions.
It is nice to be thinking about this proactively. And actually, I want to highlight, in addition to the American Jobs Plan, but the state just passed in the state budget a new bond act, a $3 billion bond act that would, for the first time, include up to, I think, $250 million that can be made available for proactively addressing flood situations, so that we're doing proactive buyouts, for example, of properties that are at risk of flooding or have flooded in the past, instead of what we do now, which is we wait till they're flooded and then we buy them out, which is happening in some parts of New York City. Like I know Staten Island, and I think parts of Queens are doing some post buyouts, some post-disaster buyouts, which is really unfortunate. And it puts families in a really bad place in order to access that. So Melanie, we've all changed how we're doing work. I don't know about all of you, but I am sitting here in my apartment today, not in my office in downtown Manhattan. How will the recent explosion in remote work factor into the energy needs of the future?
So thanks, Julie. And yes, I have been sitting in this same chair, in this same room, behind this same screen for over a year. And I think change and transformation, this is an interesting moment, because we are at a transformational moment. We are at a transformational moment in how we work. We are at a transformational moment in how we think about energy and the delivery of it and the safety of it and what runs through our pipes and wires, and how we will innovate and collaborate for the future. So when we think about remote work and we think about what it means for our 1.8 million customers in New York City and Long Island, two things automatically come to mind. And the interesting shift that we've seen from, high intensity industry and how industry might use energy, to the shift of now how energy is being used in a different way for more hours during a day for our customers, it really does come down to being reliable, right? What is the reliability and the safety that we put around how we deliver energy? But what we're thinking about now, because like all of us, it's about planning and how do we get to the future at the same time as giving customers safe and reliable energy. How do we do it in a way that drives us to that clean energy future? And how are we planning and working and collaborating? So even as a business, for us, we are thinking about that decarbonization and that being our goal, and our goals being aligned with New York State, New York City, in terms of how we get there. And that has been probably the single biggest focus of ours is over the last decade, actually. When I think about what we've needed to do, when we think about infrastructure and how are we planning for the infrastructure of tomorrow, it goes to the heart of the programming that NYSERDA is talking about. It goes to the heart of what the mayor's office and Jainey outlined and Cortney outlined. It is really around collaboration and how we help think about this new world order, especially as customers, our customers are working from home and what they want and need from us. But how are we going to do this from the future? And what will be that requirement from us as a utility business, and really just trying to help us graduate and move to that clean energy future in partnership with everyone on this line.
It's true. We all need to be thinking about these things. So I have a question for sort of everybody to think about. This is focused on sort of the economics and the economic recovery. And I think we've all been very mindful of the fact that climate change does not impact everybody the same way. So what is the approach to training for green jobs and ensuring that communities that have been most impacted or most disadvantaged by climate change have access to those jobs? Who wants to, I'm going to put you on the spot, Adrienne, and maybe ask you if you want to start first.
Sure, no problem. Happy to, Julie. It's a really important question. I mean, when we talk about what we're trying to do in the state of New York from a climate perspective, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act laid it out pretty squarely for us that, not only do we need to reduce greenhouse gases, but we need to be working collectively to usher in an inclusive clean energy economy, right? That's the major pillars of the 2019, Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act that governs and guides our work. When we think about, the opportunities of a clean energy transformation, a clean energy revolution, if you will, it's got to start with communities and particularly disadvantaged communities. And the CLCPA squarely points to, a goal of making sure that we have 40% of benefits being delivered to disadvantaged communities, working to address, systemic and legacy issues within society, helping to raise up, communities of color, environmental justice communities, low-income communities, and making sure that those are priority populations in the work that we do. And so when we think about, new industries such as offshore wind, right? It's new to the U.S., it's new to New York, but it's not new globally, right? It's 30 years old as an industry. It's, we've seen projects come to fruition and even be decommissioned. But it's a different ecosystem here, and it's a different ecosystem, particularly of stakeholders and of opportunities with workforce. And so we're cognizant that there's a great opportunity for knowledge transfer, but also adaptation adaptation. And so we've put a lot of time and money as a state into making sure that we're focusing on that inclusive clean energy economy aspect as we grow this new to the US industry, new to New York industry. And so the state has earmarked $20 million of funds specifically towards the Offshore Wind Training Institute, which is really a virtual institute that will help to spur statewide investments that are complementary to existing workforce training avenues, connections, whether that's pre-apprenticeship training through the trades, whether that's working with academic partners, whether that's working with local community groups and organizations that have the connections to particularly disadvantaged communities, and also major partnerships with the SUNY system. Likewise, in this past budget, an additional $10 million have been allocated in public funding to the CUNY schools for similar purposes. But there's also $15 million of private investments that are already being brought to bear with the Suffolk County Community College working in partnership with Orsted and Eversource as part of its major project. Likewise, Equinor has another $5 million of funding that's going to be specifically about just access to various training activities. So that's $45 million of potential training activities that offshore wind is helping to usher in. Really foundational is this question of who gets trained, what are the jobs, when are the jobs, where are the jobs, and how are we making sure that we are making those inroads. So the very first $3 million of the state's $20 million to get that ball rolling was actually solicited between January and March. We're reviewing proposals right now and hope to make awards this coming summer. Was really trying to dig at that issue of saying, okay, the very first dollars that go out the door for this initiative need to be highlighting, the deep work that has to start with disadvantaged communities and bringing them into the space. So whether that's pre-apprenticeship trainings or relationships with supply chain for local local hiring and partnerships with these communities, that was our first step forward. It's not going to be all of the money, right? We have to work on cultivating the research of which jobs are required when and how best do we roll out those training mechanisms to make sure that we're not just training people without direct access to a job. It needs to be seamless. They need to be employed. But we know that, when we talk about hiring, the last thing we can do is show up at the 11th hour and say, oh, we're looking for, 50 people and who's got the credentials, and it's, disadvantaged. This is the legacy injustice that we can't repeat. We've seen this movie before. It's not where we need to be heading. So we're working proactively to say, what will be the skills and how do we start to bring these communities into the space such that when the job is ready, you're there with your resume and you can say, I'm willing, able, and qualified, and here I am. And that's the goal that we're trying to roll out with this new industry.
Great. Anybody else want to jump in on this question?
I'll just say that what Adrienne is saying is so dead on, and in terms of that granular level of work that has to be done, so that you're not coming in at the last hour and saying, hey, we got these 50 jobs. And I just think that one of the things we should be thinking about as a region and the work that NYSERDA is doing in the state is how this is a question that's going to be coming up across the country as we retool our entire economy to be a decarbonized economy. And so the hope, I think, is that with the success that I believe that we'll have in New York, that this can be a model for other regions as well. So it's everything Adrienne described is just exactly what the Waterfront Alliance would advocate for.
I think the other critical piece is putting our pulse on our communities up close and personal. And what do I mean by that? I think not only do we need to build the pipeline of creating clean energy jobs, or I'm thinking about it even from an industry perspective. How when we think about the even interconnection of renewables into an existing system, that requires and demands a new frame of technical capability. But what I've been finding that I don't know if we necessarily have created the kind of excitement yet with our high schoolers who are contemplating direction. That's where I say, here's where the pulse check or that local connection, we have to begin to inspire young people to see clean energy jobs as a pathway. We have to create that excitement about that. And I think that's the piece that I know from us as an industry, I want to lean into even more, creating that excitement and showing possibility. And at the end of the day, the real piece for us, not only to drive clean energy, but to also drive economic vitality, is to ensure that the jobs that are coming onto the system are livable wage jobs, and that we really help create a solid economic future for the next generation of clean energy professionals.
I think that's really critical. And I think I'm again going to point to the state, because we just passed something as part of the state budget. There's a requirement now for labor peace agreements on operations and maintenance jobs for large scale renewable energy. There's a requirement for prevailing wages, which has been the case for procurements that NYSERDA does anyways for large scale. And there's support for Buy American for supply chain. So there is an effort and a desire, and we worked with labor to help advance some of these, to make more of these products here in New York, and trying to get more into those communities. And I think you're right. You have to start with the excitement. It has to start young before people start getting on the job path. So it is exciting. And, on the resiliency front, I don't fully know how we're going to make sure that it gets to all of the disadvantaged communities, but I can tell you that we're expecting that 65,000 jobs will be generated just from the $3 billion Bond Act, and 40% of those are going to need to benefit disadvantaged communities, and that could be the projects themselves, it could be the work associated with them. And I think that's something that's important, that we're grounding into a lot of the decisions that are being made now, is this idea of investing this. And I give a lot of credit to our colleagues in the environmental justice movement and the New York News Coalition for getting that into our Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is now also a basis of what's happening with the American Jobs Plan, where that's one of the principles that is being advanced. Jainey, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Thanks, Julie. Yeah, and thanks for bringing up the Bond Act. It is I hope it still has to go through the ballots, but I hope it will be an important source of funding for resiliency going forward. And I'm so glad that those equity considerations are baked in. And I think to that point, we are really trying to, at the city level, develop tools to help us prioritize where to invest resiliency funding and make sure that we're not just taking into account physical indicators of risk, but also the social indicators of risk. We've developed a pioneering heat vulnerability index that takes things like density and lack of vegetation into account when considering heat risk, but recognizing that heat does affect poorer communities, those with higher populations of disabled residents and elderly residents. We're also taking the social indicators of heat risk into account as well. And when you overlay those, it's quite stark. The neighborhoods that are most impacted by extreme heat are in the city are the South Bronx, Northern Manhattan, and Central Brooklyn. So that's where we've been investing our heat resiliency funding to ensure that that the environmental benefits of our adaptation investments are going to those communities that we know are disproportionately impacted. Now, on the job side, we have this really great program called Cool Roofs, which it's such a simple solution. We're coating rooftops with a special white coating in order to increase our reflective surfaces across the city. It not only keeps buildings cooler, it reduces our need to turn on the air conditioner. It thereby reduces energy bills. When you cluster these rooftops in in geographic proximity to each other, they actually have the ability to bring down ambient temperatures in neighborhoods as well, so that neighborhood actually feels cooler. And it is a job training program. We're actually training workers to do this, these roof coatings, and hopefully facilitate transitions then to other kinds of construction related jobs. I'd love to see us develop more programs like that. But back to the heat vulnerability index, I just wanted to mention that we're also creating a similar tool that's focused on coastal vulnerability, because again, you know, so many of our coastal protection projects after Sandy were really dictated by the federal government. You know, we were responding to requirements that were set by federal programs, but learning lessons from that first round and coming out of now that first round of design as projects move into construction, we want to be more proactive about where we prioritize these investments. So we're learning from the HVI, the Heat Vulnerability Index, and applying that to a new coastal tool going forward.
Great. So there's lots of opportunities, and there's a lot more that's coming, and I think our state is well positioned to help us move in that direction. I just want to remind folks that if you would like to ask a question, please send it in through the question and answer function at the bottom of the screen, or at least at the bottom of my Zoom. One of the questions we got is and it seems super appropriate here on Earth Day, is what are ways concerned citizens can do their part to lower greenhouse gas emissions? I will start with two of my favorite things. One is take mass transit or take a bike or a scooter. But whatever you do on transit, like taking an individual car is the least efficient way and most polluting way until we have an all electric fleet. And even then it creates congestion. So I would encourage you to use mass transit or alternative transportation. And in what's very exciting news today, the mayor has announced we're re-engaging on composting in New York City, which is very exciting. So I would urge you all to compost your food waste. It's not that hard. I have a little container that I put my food scraps in, and I right now I walk it over to Hudson River Park, and they have a couple of drop-off locations, which is very nice. So those are two easy things. Who else would like to jump in on this?
I'll jump in on this because this is a topic that comes up so often. I agree absolutely with what you said, Julie, and those are, for New York City, top two for sure. I always want to emphasize when this question is asked, how important it is to be politically active. That the best thing you can do for climate change and for reducing your greenhouse gas input or emissions and footprint is to be engaged in the political process that is working towards the things that we saw today in terms of commitments to decarbonization. But there's still a long way to go. And so the more that you can engage in bottom line voting, but also just telling your elected official what you want, making sure that the people who you care about in your neighborhood, your family, are all speaking up about the importance of climate change. It's just critically important. And this will be something that people will need to be politically engaged in for a very long time. So I just always want to emphasize that. I think it's missed a little bit. We get in these debates about, should we be vegetarian? Should we be vegan? Should we eat a hamburger once in a while? And in the end, I think it's about the systems change that we need over time that's going to really reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So, and the other stat that I like to talk about is that during the pandemic, they realized that emissions went down only about 18 or 20%. And that's because the rest of emissions are just baked into our infrastructure. So there's not a whole lot you can do in terms of your personal impact if you want to go past 20% of reduction in greenhouse gas emissions.
That's great. Well, I will say transportation emissions went down more because people were not driving, and that did make an immediate difference. And I dropped in the chat a link to our Greener City Hall event that we are hosting tonight, again, with major mayoral candidates, and to talk about what they're planning for their next election. And we'll be doing much more on that. Stay tuned.
Julie, can I jump in on the what can I do question? We need to build these projects. We have an incredible opportunity here to decarbonize our grid. And if we decarbonize our grid and we work on all of our beneficial electrification, you know, it's that electrify everything and decarbonize the grid pathway that's achievable. And to say, well, you know, how do I influence, you know, infrastructure and these projects? You get out and you support them. You do your research, you know, and so start there. Do your research, you know, learn about these technologies, learn about how the projects are being built. And we hope that you come to similar conclusions, is that these are really robust projects and really robust designs. And there's a lot of opportunity that has been, you know, work that has been done to make sure that they're being developed in a way that is responsible and is cost effective. And we can do these things. You know, it is one thing to say, oh, I love wind energy or I love renewables, but I don't know about that project. You know, we need to get beyond that. And we need to say, hey, I have a sister, a brother, a niece, you know, my you know, neighbor down the block works in these industries, and, you know, that's her job. I would love for that to happen, but we can't say that unless we start actually deploying these projects. And there's, you know, continuously a conversation about innovation and research and development. We have the tools. I mean, I love research, I love innovation, but we have the tools in our hands. You know, they're right here. We need to deploy them. And so if we can cultivate, you know, understanding of what this infrastructure actually means, what its benefits are, you know, when we look at what the, you know, what the total benefits are of our offshore wind program and our land-based programs, you know, to boot, this clean energy transition that we're talking about and greening our grid is going to, net of program costs and looking at benefits, you know, social cost of carbon benefits, you know, health benefits, you know, resiliency benefits, you know, these are real tangible benefits that we pay for as a society, and we're about to get $11 billion worth of net positive investments out of these initiatives. So I think what we can do is educate ourselves and be, you know, to Cortney's point, you know, be active and ready to help support these projects coming to fruition.
That's exactly right. We can't just say no, and we can't just talk about policy. We have to say yes.
Julie, I'd like to jump in here too. You know, I feel like it's my job to make sure that every time this question is asked, we're also talking about preparing for the impacts of climate change that we know we can't avoid. So I really want to build off of both Cortney and Adrienne's responses and just encourage everyone to ask your local leaders, or any leaders for that matter, how climate impacts are being taken into account in any decision that the government's making. So if it's a land use decision, ask how they're accounting for climate change. If it's a housing decision, ask how they're accounting for climate change. If it's an infrastructure decision, ask how they're accounting for climate change. We need to take that approach where we're starting to think about climate change in everything we do. And that's the only way we're going to rise to the challenge that climate change presents.
And of course, certainly all of my distinguished panelists, I agree, and we need to do all of the above. But one of the things that we can do very easily every single day, the less you use, the better it is for everyone. So when we think about energy efficiency, please take advantage of those opportunities to use less, right? You use less, we move less. So it becomes that simple. Turn down the thermostat, close your windows, understand where you some of the easiest tools are probably right underneath us. And all of the opportunities and options to begin to use less, there are so many ways to help people do it. Please, I encourage that. Every therm you use less helps us in the long run, and it helps us get to our pathway. We know that this is a process, and we will get there. But a part of getting there is doing those things that are immediately at our disposal today. Use less.
That's excellent. And that's not just true of energy, that's also true on waste as well. So I think about that. We waste a lot, like use your reusable water bottle, use your reusable bag. You know, I always say that like when we did the bottle deposit in the 1980s, it didn't include water because people were not drinking bottled water at the time. You have the best water in the whole world in New York City. We should all just be drinking that out of our reusable water bottle as much as we can. But again, I'm going to reiterate what Cortney said, what I should have said, given my organization. Yes, vote. We have a question from the audience that's for Jainey. How is the city educating the community about the Eastside Resiliency Project? Because there is concern and misinformation, I think, being spread about the impacts on the park for the neighborhood that may be creating some negative feelings related to that very important projects.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. So just for those who are not familiar, I want to just describe the Eastside Coastal Resiliency Project because I don't think I did that before. It's a 2.5 mile long project that will protect the Lower East Side, which is a community that was really devastated by Hurricane Sandy. And it'll protect 110,000 people, 28,000 of whom live in public housing. Now, as I did say before, community engagement has been so critical to this project. There have been countless community meetings over a period of 7 years. To get to where we are now, which is a point of construction. And we're, you know, so the community has been just integrally involved, and we've responded to so much of the community input that's been provided, including, you know, input to ensure that the community had access to the park during construction. So we're actually constructing the project in a way that is phased so that some part of the park will be open at all times during construction. This was not the original plan, so it was certainly in response to community input that we ended up in this place, and I think the project is better for it. But we are making sure to also provide regular notices to the community about construction impacts. There's actually a community advisory group that meets regularly. Their meetings are public, so anyone can participate. The Department of Design and Construction, which is the agency that's responsible for construction, is also providing regular updates to the 2 community boards that are impacted, and those meetings are public as well. There's a DDC, Department of Design and Construction community construction liaison, and you can submit inquiries to them or questions to them through an inquiry tool. We're also providing regular email blasts. I get my email blast from DDC every Friday about community impacts. The impacts are also being posted on social media, and all of the information is available on the website. So there are multiple ways and different points of engagement to get information about the construction itself. You know, I hope that in the long run, the community will be extremely pleased with the overall final project, which will provide flood protection again, but also will provide new amenities to this community. We are redesigning the park based on what the community asked for and wanted. One example I love to share is that, you know, the community said they love the park as it is, but all the fields and courts and tracks and all of that are fenced off. So there are a few interstitial spaces where families can get together and have a picnic and just be in the green space and enjoy that space. So we've taken that into account, and the design of the park, once the project is completed, will reflect that. There will also be new pedestrian bridges over the FDR into the park, so it will make for a much more inviting entrance into the park. So it's not just a flood protection project, it's an open space project. It's a waterfront access project. And I acknowledge that there are going to be short-term inconveniences during construction. But like I said, I hope that the long-term benefits really outweigh those short-term inconveniences.
Thank you for that. And yes, this is an important project. And unfortunately, big construction projects take some time and sometimes some short-term inconveniences that will ultimately have a greater benefit. I did not tee this question up, but I'm very pleased that someone asked it. Can anyone speak to vehicle congestion pricing, and where do we stand on that? And I happen to be highly engaged in that particular program. So for anyone who does not know, congestion pricing was approved by the state legislature as part of the 2019 budget, and the federal government needed to direct the MTA and the Department of Transportation about what kind of environmental review that required. This is a program that is going to put a fee on vehicles traveling 60th Street and below in Manhattan, outside of FDR Drive and the West Side Highway. And it's going to take those funds and it's going to invest them in mass transit. That's buses, it's subways, it's trains, including the commuter rail lines out to Long Island, the Long Island Railroad, and to the Metro North. And once we got the new administration, they have determined the environmental review that's required. So the MTA just found out that they could do an environmental assessment, which is sort of the less burdensome environmental review that's required. They have started that process now. They've been waiting for this approval for almost 2 years. Once they do that, we are hopeful that we might be able to get something up and running in 2022. There will be opportunities for public comment. They are going to have to determine exactly what the fees are going to be, but they have to raise enough revenue through the congestion pricing to provide about $15 billion worth of capital investment, which turns out to be, I think, about $1 billion a year in revenue that could be supported with that. So this is something that is moving forward. We know there's going to start to become some opposition coming up. We've asked for air monitoring to be set up to ensure that there are not negative ramifications for, in particular, I think on the East River crossings, folks are concerned there may be people who create parking lots in Brooklyn and in Queens before they park to get into Manhattan. But it is something that's moving forward, and we are hoping that it will be implemented as soon as possible, but not before January of 2022 is my best guess at this point in time. I don't know if we have any more questions from the audience. I think we might have time for one more. How would panelists rate New York City's current climate resilience? Who wants to go first? Courtney or Jainey?
I'll go first. Yeah, I'll just go really quickly because I know we're going to run out of time. So look, I think to be honest, we're not quite where we need to be by a long shot. So there's a significant delay between what happened when Hurricane Sandy hit the city and where we are now. The federal funding that is needed to do a lot of the larger projects is just so significant, and the time horizon for planning that is so long that we are behind in many ways. Plus, as I mentioned before, the city just isn't really built to withstand the effects of climate change. It wasn't anything that was conceived of at the time when most of the city was built. So we have a long way to go. And I just want to make one point related to the funding. So we are now seeing a huge influx of funding from the federal government for all the things that were mentioned on today's call. The amount of money that we need, though, for resiliency is going to exceed what we are going to get. The federal budget just cannot cover all of the resiliency projects that are going to be needed across the country from different agencies. So the Army Corps of Engineers, the number of major projects they're planning in other coastal areas, if you total that all up, it exceeds the construction budget of the Army Corps of Engineers by orders of magnitude. So we're just going to have some really tough choices to make over time. So as we see economic growth hopefully pick up with all these investments, and we get on the right course with climate change mitigation and adaptation, we're still going to have to be working really closely with communities to make sure that what we are planning is actually going to be feasible in terms of the funding that will be available. So it's really important to manage community expectations. It's really important not to over-plan and under-design. So or over-promise and under-deliver is a major threat that we have, I think, and collectively as a community of practitioners as well. So I just want to put that out there as something that we need to be thinking of, especially as some of these federal investments start to wind down that are not related, that will in the future not be related to stimulus funding. So, so anyway, again, and it's another reason to really be involved in many things that are going on in your communities.
Do I get the last word here, Julie?
I think so, but then I think we're out of time after that.
Well, you know, I just want to say that New York City is far ahead of most other municipalities, both in the country and around the globe, on climate resiliency. And I don't disagree with Cortney. We still have a lot of work to do. We are certainly safer than we were during Hurricane Sandy. A lot of work has been done, and we have learned a lot in the process. But there is still a lot more work ahead of us. But I think the fact that we are sitting here saying that and still a leader in this space really means that we need reforms at the federal level to make sure that communities can access dollars proactively to be able to advance solutions. We do not have time to reinvent the wheel. We need to make sure that there's effective knowledge transfer happening across communities across the country. And we need the federal government to be coordinated so that we are not having to arbitrate between conflicts between agencies or having to sort of piece together different programs to to make the whole puzzle work. We need those processes to be streamlined. So I'm very hopeful actually that the Biden administration's focus on climate change will help to make some of those reforms so that we are in a better place moving forward.
Thank you for that. I think that's all we have time for today, unless I am mistaken, friends from ABNY.
Yeah, I think we're going to wrap up now, but just wanted to come on and thank you all so much for joining. Julie, thank you for being an all-star moderator. And this concludes our Earth Day panel. We hope to see you all soon and to partner again. This was really wonderful, and we really appreciate you guys taking the time.
Thank you.
And thank you so much.
Have a great day, everyone.
Happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day.